It's good timing. Oh, hey, John. Good to see you here as well. So I will go ahead and get started, and Jack can jump back in once he gets to a place where there's a little less noise on his window. So we're going to be talking a little bit about taking a Drupal site and then how you or why you might consider turning that Drupal site into a Drupal and Gatsby site. And so a few housekeeping items. This will be recorded and captioned. It does take a little bit, maybe a day or so. I don't know for sure, but you'll get that in an email for everything that you see. And if you do have any questions, make sure to ask those in the Q&A tab. I'll try to leave 15 minutes or so at the end for questions. This should go through the hour, but definitely let us know along the way, and we can stop and answer questions as we go, and we'll also answer some questions at the end. And Jack, are you back?
I'm back. Perfect timing, right? Right as we start construction on the window.
I told everyone that we had this conversation 2 minutes before it started, and you said I really hope the timing works out. And of course, it worked out in the wrong way, but that's okay.
Murphy's Law. Cool.
Do you want to go ahead, Jack?
Sure. Howdy, I'm Jack. I'm a senior product manager here at Gatsby. I work with Shane on our content workflow squad, where we work on our CMS integrations and CMS experiences like Preview, and super excited to be here today.
And I'm Shane, senior engineering manager at Gatsby, and I've been at Gatsby for about over 2 years now. And when I started, I actually was an engineer working pretty much exclusively on integrating Gatsby and Drupal. So this is close to home to me. I've spent a lot of time, some of you know me. I spent a lot of time in the Drupal world, probably, 12 plus years at this point. So always interested when I have an opportunity to talk about Gatsby and Drupal together, because Drupal kind of holds a special place in my heart, just because I've spent so much time working with the Drupal over the years. So yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about this today. Anything else, Jack, before I kick it off?
You probably already said it, but this webinar is very exciting and engaging if you all ask questions. And so I am here to be Chief Interruption Officer and interrupt Shane with your questions. We might hold some of them for the end. My cat might say hi, but please ask questions throughout. Shane has a great demo later on, and we even have an exciting poll. So go ahead and get started, Shane.
All right. So the big question that a lot of you ask, or a lot of people ask, is, why should I even consider going headless with my Drupal site? What are the benefits? Drupal, seems pretty great on its own. Why would I need to consider going headless? And if you've been around Drupal for a while, you've probably heard talks of, going headless with Drupal or going decoupled with Drupal for the last, probably 8 to 10 years, and then more so in the last 5, probably. But let's talk about some of the reasons you might want to consider it. So if you've ever had difficult Drupal major version upgrades, if you've ever been worried, Wednesday mornings, that there's going to be a security update, this might be interesting to you. If you ever feel like you're hitting a wall with how fast your page loads, or you're trying to improve your Lighthouse scores and you just can't get it over a certain threshold, and same with SEO and conversion rates, and as well as Drupal developers are kind of a specialized skill set, so sometimes they're hard to find. And so there might be reasons to consider going headless. So if you answered yes to any of these, then going headless can possibly help you. And I'm a little biased, but Gatsby is the best choice for going headless. And I'm going to tell you why. The good thing is a lot of these points, whether you choose Gatsby or something else, is still valid, but I do believe Gatsby is the best, and we'll talk about why. So if you have, if you're kind of having trouble with Drupal major version upgrades, every few years you have to do a major version upgrades. And, in the past, sometimes you had to basically rebuild your site. And even now it's maybe a little more complicated than you thought it was supposed to be. But by decoupling your site, you can kind of take your time to upgrade your backend, because you can upgrade your front end and back end on your terms and your own timeline. So you might be able to, upgrade your front end a little bit and your back end stays the same, and then you can upgrade your back end and then point your front end to it. So you can kind of take your time. You're not on, necessarily kind of a ticking timeline once you want to start that upgrade process. And then if you're familiar with, security updates for Drupal, there's a day of the week where everyone, checks, and you might get, some security updates that you have to update your Drupal major or Drupal core or any of your Drupal modules that you're using. And so if you're managing a lot of sites too, then you have to try to figure out, okay, which sites do I need to update? How serious is it? Is it something I need to drop everything that I'm doing to fix right now, or is it something that can wait a little bit? Since a Gatsby site is static, by default, it means there's a smaller attack surface. So, I mean, actually, your Drupal site doesn't even need to be publicly exposed if you don't want it to. And static is a little bit more secure. So, and static sites are fast. So if you need speed, if you have the need for speed, like I do, at least when I want to build a website, I want it to be fast, I want it to be performant. So by default, static is fast, and you have additional tools with Gatsby, like our image plugin, to make your site even faster. So improved Lighthouse scores, static is fast. So that's another reason why you choose headless. And you might be wondering, okay, what makes Gatsby faster than just using Drupal by default? Because if you've been around Drupal and you've built some Drupal sites, you know you can make a fast Drupal site. It is 100% possible. Drupal provides you all the tools. It's very flexible. But by default, Drupal is dynamic. And what that means is, it wants to load things from the database. And then you can add all these different layers of caching. You can cache, the database. You can add some opcode caching. You can use memcache or varnish. You can cache your twig templates. There's all these different levels and layers of caching, but that's kind of complicated. And all the goals of all that caching is to make Drupal as static as possible. Well, Gatsby is static by default, so static is fast, and then you can kind of inverses it, right? So Drupal is kind of slow by default, and you work hard to make it fast. Gatsby is fast by default. And yeah, you could do things to make it slow, but it's going to be really hard to do. So by default, it's going to be much faster. And this is kind of the question is, if people can't find your site, does it even exist? Kind of the old adage: if a tree falls in the forest, does it actually make a sound? You want your site to be found. You want people to be able to search for it, find it, and faster sites tend to rank better on search engines, and they also tend to convert better. So whatever the goals are of your website, making it a little bit faster is going to prove to make it more easily findable and get whatever you want your users to do, make that happen more frequently. And on top of that, Gatsby includes all the tools you'd expect to build a top ranking site. And so static leads to more conversions. And then the last thing is, who's going to work on the site? Gatsby is built on top of React. So React is, a JavaScript library. Gatsby is a JavaScript framework. And there's a large ecosystem of JavaScript developers, so React and Gatsby developers to choose from. So if you take steps to modernize your front end, you can help continue to attract top talent. That there's a lot of new engineers and developers that are interested in these JavaScript frameworks, and so it's going to be easier to find than maybe some Drupal developers, where the skills are really valuable, but also it's maybe a little bit harder to find people that have spent time, like I have and like a lot of you have, in the Drupal world. So the question is, what if you need more than static? Static is great, but not everything can be static. You might be, kind of like shaking your head and saying, well, this isn't going to work for my site because of this or that. And so Gatsby has a couple things to help with that. DSG is deferred static generation. And this is kind of like the Drupal basic model, right? It's the first time you hit the page, it's going to go and it's going to generate it. The second time, it's going to be cached. So if you have a huge site with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pages, and maybe you have, let's say, a news site, and anything after like the first 5 pages hardly gets any traffic anymore, well, maybe you can defer those pages so they're not built during the static generation or like build time, and they're actually just built on request. So you can choose which pages you want to be static by default, and also choose which pages that maybe you don't care if the performance is a little bit slower because they're not as important in the grand scheme of your site. And also, we have SSR, which is server-side rendering. This is like the escape hatch. It's like, I want to be able to go get something dynamically whenever I want. This could be, let's say you have an e-commerce site and you have an add to cart button, but you always want to check and make sure that there's actually a product in stock before you display that. You could make an SSR request. And then you'd be able to go through and pull any data you want from a server, from an API, use that to hydrate the page and display it as you want. So you kind of have these two different options. You have this DSG or this SSR option as kind of like your ability to get the dynamic parts dynamic and then keep as much static as possible. If you do decide to go with Gatsby on any project, I would always encourage you to try, like always, rather than trying to like start dynamic and find excuses to make it static, always start static and like really sell yourself to, if something has to be dynamic. Like the more you can keep static, the better. Now, of course, there are reasons for going dynamic, and that's why we have these things, but definitely always err on the side of static when possible. And so why should I choose Gatsby if I'm going headless? So some of those were hopefully already answered, but the reason that I like to encourage people to choose Gatsby is choose Gatsby if you want to write less code. So you're still going to be writing more code probably than if you were just building a simple Drupal site, but you're going to write a lot less code than if you were using another JavaScript framework. And the reason for that is because Gatsby has this really diverse set of plugins. So you can pick whatever CMS you want that's supported, any major CMS, and we have a plugin that you can use. And really a plugin is kind of like a Drupal module, right? If you were going to try to build a site with Laravel and you're going to build it from scratch, you're going to write a lot more code than if you were going to build a site with Drupal. That's kind of the appeal of Drupal, right? Is you have this ecosystem of modules and maybe themes even that you can kind of piece together on your site, and it gets you most of the way there. So Gatsby's plugin ecosystem is kind of like that, maybe not quite to the same extent, but very similar, where you can get a lot of the way there. There's kind of in Drupal, there was always a saying like, oh, there's a module for that. Well, in Gatsby, it's kind of like there's a plugin for that. And it's pretty similar, where you can find plugins that kind of integrate in with different tools, different sources, and you can kind of pull in your content from anywhere without ever having to know anything about the API. So it makes going headless a lot easier than having to really learn and understand everything about, in this case, Drupal's JSON API. So now let's get into some of the more technical things. Let's say you do decide you want to go headless, but what does that really mean? What are you going to give up? Because with anything, it's a trade-off, right? You're going to give up some things that Drupal gives you in response to getting some really nice things that Gatsby gives you. So let's talk about what those are. So if you think about the core components of a Drupal site, and you can tell an engineer like myself designed this slide. I didn't have a designer. Jack didn't have time to revamp this slide for me. Even he would have made it look much prettier. But Drupal has a bunch of core building blocks, right? And I'm probably missing some, but you have the theme, you have blocks, you have views, you have all your content types, your menus, taxonomy, modules, and even like your actual content itself. So what do you look at if you're going to add Gatsby to that? Well, you're going to turn on Drupal's JSON API, and you're no longer going to use Drupal for the theme, for the blocks, or for your views. So right away, you might be feeling like, okay, well, I love views. I know I did. So giving that up would be hard. But there's some really cool tools that Gatsby gives you to help make that easy. And then everything else with Drupal, all your content and backend stuff stays the same, which means that you can still model content, you can still set up menus and taxonomy. Your content editors still will use Drupal's content editing interface, and all of that will remain the same. Instead, Gatsby gives you React components, a GraphQL layer, and then you can use any front-end tools you might want with Gatsby, like Tailwind, Emotion. In the example that I'm going to show, I use something called Chakra. So there's any kind of front-end tools that there are plugins that you can add on, and you can kind of design the site any way you want. You're not really locked in. So if you are going to decide to move, your Drupal theme to a Drupal Gatsby site, what needs to happen? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to break down your site into React components. And you might wonder, okay, if you're not familiar with JavaScript frameworks or React, what is a React component? So the easiest answer is a React component is just a bit of code that returns HTML. So it can return a lot of HTML or maybe just a little snippet of HTML. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just a way to generate HTML that then gets populated on the page. And so if you think in terms of components, you're going to be breaking up a Gatsby site just like you would with regions in a Drupal theme. So you define like your main regions, or in Gatsby or in React land, they're just going to be components. You have a header, a footer, maybe a nav, your main content, and that's kind of like your core. Like in your main layout, you're going to have a set number of components. So if your theme regions become components, that's great, but there's actually more. Your Drupal blocks actually also become components. So it's kind of like this Russian nesting doll of, you have all these components within components within components, but really that's what Drupal is too, right? So you're gonna kind of feel like once you understand how it works, it's gonna start to feel pretty similar in just a little bit different way. So you're gonna see a lot of similarities, and that's gonna help you coming from Drupal to going to something like Gatsby. Because in Drupal, you would have twig templates inside twig templates inside twig templates. And it was kind of tricky to sometimes find, okay, which template do I modify? Do I want to modify the field, or do I need to go up a level? Do I want to modify the region of the theme? And it's the same thing with React components, but it's a lot easier to kind of traverse that tree. So there's a lot of things that make it easier. So we looked at a simple example. This is the Gatsby swag store. You could really break down any site, and you probably could do this really quickly. You have kind of a nav bar component up top, sidebar component, a product card component, which is inside a product grid. And each of these things could be components within components. You might have, down at the bottom, there might be a pricing component that just has the USD and the price. So it could be even more nested levels of components, but it all kind of rolls up to one big layout component. That's the whole page. And then inside there's all the components that make up that page. And if you want to look at what a component is, defining a component is pretty simple. So a React component, it needs 3 steps. You need to import React. You need to define your component. And in this case, the component is just a header. It just says, hi, welcome to my site. And then step 3 is you're exporting that component. The one thing to note is most of the time you're going to be passing data into this component through here, where this little empty space is, if you can see my mouse. And that might be the actual title of the page you're displaying, or the body content of the page, or any other data that likely could come from a CMS like Drupal. And then that data gets passed in, and then it's just like a twig template in Drupal, but it's just a little bit different format. But you kind of insert your variable and you create your component through that data.
Hey Shane, we have a quick question
Yes.
from the audience.
Let's ask some.
How easy or hard is it to move from something like Next.js, which is also a React meta framework, to something like Gatsby? Can I still reuse my components?
Great question. A lot of your components would be reusable, yes. So Gatsby is actually kind of a thin layer of things. So when you look at a Gatsby site, especially if you're new to Gatsby, you're going to see a lot of things you can say, oh, this is just Gatsby. Well, really, it's just React. So if you built something in React, all your components should be able to be pretty much transferred over. Now, there'll be a little bit of work as far as like how do you get data into those components. But if you built a well-defined like component library, it shouldn't be that difficult to just kind of change how the data works. And Gatsby has a really cool data layer, which is kind of how we pull it in, and you use GraphQL queries to populate that data. But your components would essentially be the same. You wouldn't hardly have to change anything at all besides, maybe tweak how the data gets passed into them. Any other questions you wanted to answer, Jack, or that?
Yeah, I'm trying to, ask them when they make sense, but I think this one's good. Why the JSON API and not the GraphQL Drupal module?
That's a very good question. So I'll answer this in a couple different ways, but the JSON API module was a little bit well supported for how it needed to work to pull in data into Gatsby. And so that's the one that was first built around. That's the one that has the most support. There are some people that have worked with the GraphQL module. One of the problems with that is version 4 of the GraphQL module, you have to define your own schema. So there's no guarantee of what that schema is going to look like, which makes it really hard to build a source plugin because one Drupal site's schema could be different than another Drupal site. So there's no consistency there, or no guarantee of consistency. So the JSON API module, it's very consistent with how Drupal exposes its entities. And the cool thing about it is once you pull Drupal or pull content from your Drupal site into Gatsby, Gatsby creates a GraphQL API around that. So you don't really even need to care how the data is getting sent back and forth, because in Gatsby, you're just working with GraphQL. So even though you're using the JSON API in Drupal, you're still writing GraphQL queries inside Gatsby. And we'll show an example of how that works. There are some possible future ideas that we have that maybe we would move to the GraphQL module, but it's not immediate. I think the JSON API module is best supported because it does give you things like incremental builds, which is where essentially, let's say you just change one page, it doesn't invalidate and have to rebuild the entire static site. It only changes the pages in your site that have actually changed. So without that, it's kind of hard to build a scalable site. So using the GraphQL module does break down if you want to build a bigger site with Gatsby and Drupal. And so we kind of talked about Gatsby's data layer. This is how it works. You have a bunch of different data sources potentially. So in our example, our CMS could be Drupal. You have source plugins you install into your Gatsby site. It pulls it into this GraphQL data layer. And I kind of think of that as Gatsby's secret sauce, right? We have this data layer that you can pull in from a bunch of different sources. So one of the things that you might do is, let's say people on your team are really familiar with Drupal for content editing, but for whatever reason, they really want to use Shopify for add to cart experience and for an e-commerce experience. So you have some products as well. The great thing is you can pull both into Gatsby and pulls it into that data layer, and you could create pages with some Drupal content and some Shopify content, potentially even on the same page. So you could have a page that shows recent blog posts that's pulling from Drupal and recent products pulling from Shopify. And that's just one example. You could link up a bunch of different sources and pull it all into the data layer. And then of course you use GraphQL queries and create all your different components that build out the pages of your site. And as I mentioned before, Gatsby plugins similar to a Drupal module and how it works to add functionality. Of course, it is written in a completely different way. It's kind of a loose analogy, but if you think about it in those terms, which is what I did when I came to Gatsby, because I was so familiar with how Drupal did things, I always found like, oh, this is like this in the Drupal world, but it's just done slightly differently. So that was always kind of my perception of it, is that it's kind of similar in why you would need a Drupal module. So let's look at what the future looks like. So I showed you about what currently exists. We do have something that we are working on. So it's not ready yet, but we wanted to kind of unveil it to see, see if you are thinking like we're thinking and you think this would be a good idea. So we've worked with a lot of different organizations, universities, and they sometimes run into this problem where they have a lot of Drupal sites. So they have some kind of platform that they custom built or bought that allows them to spin up a lot of different Drupal sites. But the problem is that's great for each site, and it's even maybe relatively easy to build those sites because some of them are simple, some of them are complex, but it's really hard to keep them maintained, especially when you have like Drupal major version upgrades and you're worried about that site no longer being secure. And so we've been working on a way to potentially solve this problem. And so one of the things that Drupal does really well is it's a very flexible CMS. I always think of Drupal as kind of like the CMS to build CMSs, right? If you were going to build your own headless CMS, you could use Drupal and build your own headless CMS. Well, that's kind of what we're portraying here, is that we have a model where you can use a single Drupal site to feed content into a bunch of different Gatsby sites. The great thing about that is, from an administrative perspective, you get to use, you get to administrate your different users and everything, provide them access to what sites they can publish content on. And you have one Drupal site to keep upgraded, safe, and secure. and all that content gets sent to whatever Gatsby site is supposed to receive that content. So your content editors can have access to one content editing site. They don't need to remember multiple URLs or multiple logins, and then they can easily edit all the sites that they need access to. And as an administrator, you can control the access to those sites. So they're only able to edit content on the sites that they should be editing content on.
Fantastic. Shane,
Yes.
should we run the poll?
Yes.
Awesome.
Well, let's run the poll. Do it.
Cool. There was actually, before you even showed this slide, there was some conversation in the chat about, like, what if I'm using Acquia Site Factory, or I have like one Drupal many sites sort of set up already. So we want to know from you, if you were to build a Gatsby and Drupal site, would you sort of go a single site approach, one Drupal install for one Gatsby site, or one Drupal install in many Gatsby sites, just to help us sort of gauge which use case is more common and where we should focus our efforts. I'm curious, and we kind of already know the answer from some conversation in the chat, but the numbers are coming in. It's funny to see the bars sort of go like this.
And I'm looking at the chat too, and
yeah,
I don't know how to pronounce it. I always said Agar, but I've heard Agier as well. So someone can correct me, whatever the correct pronunciation is. It's funny because I used to run a web agency, and I had like a development server, and that's how we spun up all of our client sites was with Agier. And yeah, it was really cool. I guess I should have known it still existed and it was still pretty powerful, but I haven't used it for probably, I don't know, 7-8 years now. But to kind of put a bow on this, one of the benefits of this approach is, let's say you have certain components that you want to share. So you have maybe a certain style that you design sites in. So you could build a component library inside a Gatsby theme, and each of those Gatsby sites could use that Gatsby theme. And the cool thing about that is you can then update that component library, add new features to it very easily, and then every Gatsby site would have access to that. So it's a way to, it's really kind of like a centralized way to control how the display on a lot of different sites. This is really good with if you have like a certain brand and you want to make sure your brand is displayed correctly across all of your sites. Maybe you have a shared footer or shared header, shared logos, things like that, shared color scheme. Yeah, so it's a really good model, and that's kind of one of the things that we've been exploring pretty heavily is what would that look like. And so if you are interested in helping us build this solution, we are looking for people that might be interested to help us test it out, help us provide some feedback. So if this is something that you think would be interesting to you, your agency, your university, your organization, you can go to this website, fill out just a short little form, and we're going to kind of look through and pick out a couple different use cases and try to work pretty closely with some people to help kind of inform the building of this system to make sure it fits the needs of the community. And with that, Jack, do we have any questions we wanted to answer before we jump into a demo? Or should I just jump right in?
Jump right in the demo. There are a couple questions that I'm going to find and bubble up for you. Feel free to get started. And just so everyone knows, it was almost 50-50 for solution 1 and solution 2. Multi-site was leading a little bit, but I think it would have gone to a runoff election. It was pretty tight.
Yeah, very, very close, which is, I guess, kind of what we expected, right? I think depending on your use case is dependent on which one you would have the most use for. All right, so we're going to do a quick demo. If you've already built the Gatsby Drupal site, a lot of this is going to be review, but if you haven't, this is going to be a good kind of cursory overview. What I would recommend, and we do have a link for this actually right in here. We had a decoupling Drupal workshop at GatsbyConf where Jesus Olivis, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Jesus is he put on a really awesome workshop, and it's longer. It goes into much more detail. If you want like hands-on, follow along information, and he shows how to convert like paragraphs into React components, which is a really powerful kind of paradigm for then allowing someone to use paragraphs inside your Drupal site, and that of course, maps to React components on your Gatsby site. So it's a really powerful way to build sites. We're not going to have that much time. We're probably going to have 10, 15 minutes for a demo. So I'm going to keep it really quick and try to show a real simple example and show how that can work and build on Gatsby Cloud. But definitely check that out if you want a more in-depth look. And so that link is in these slides, and you'll get this in the email that follows. I am using a simple Drupal site. It's Drupal 9. If you look, there's a few different pages on here, nothing too much, but it's using kind of the newer Drupal 9 theme. And I also have this simple starter that I created for this Gatsby site, and there's really not much to it, but it's using Chakra because it can actually make sure that I can design something that looks decent. So I need help, and Chakra helps me out. So let's go ahead and go to here, and we can go ahead and run a command. Before you would do this, though, you need to make sure that you have Gatsby installed locally. And I'll see if I can just make that. There we go. And all you need to do is run Gatsby new. I'm going to call this Drupal webinar live. And then with a new Gatsby site, if I just ran this, it would give me the default starter. A starter is kind of like an installation profile in Drupal land, where it gives you kind of a pre-configured starting point. So I'm going to use the starter that I created. I can pass in any Gatsby site to use as a starter. So I'm going to use this Drupal workshop one that I used. This is going to create that. And then it's going to require me to pass in some environment variables. So this starter has Gatsby source Drupal already installed. Gatsby source Drupal is the source plugin that connects to Drupal's JSON API. The only thing I would have to do to get this to pull data from Drupal is to go into Drupal and turn on the JSON API module. And then that's all I would need. Then install this Gatsby source Drupal plugin, and I'd be off and running. So if I pull this up, you can see in my Gatsby config, or sorry, look at my package.json, I've added Gatsby source Drupal. If I didn't have it, I could run npm install Gatsby source Drupal or yarn add Gatsby source Drupal, depending on if you want to use npm or yarn. If you're not familiar with what those are, think of Composer and Drupal. It's a package manager. npm and yarn are just JavaScript package managers, but very similar. So if you come from building Drupal modules with Composer, npm and yarn will feel very similar to you. And then in my Gatsby config, I do need to configure. Think of this as like your admin page for your Drupal module, but it's written in code. It's a config file. And each plugin could define multiple options. I see
Hey, Shane, because you're sharing your whole screen, yeah, if you can make the font bigger, that'd be great.
Is that good? And let me know if I need to go bigger.
One more. There we go. Great.
Okay. And it looks giant on my screen, but I'm sure for all of you, it looks the right size. But let me know if we need to go any bigger, or hopefully this is good. But any plugin in Gatsby can define different plugin options. In this case, we have the base URL, which we're using environment variables, and environment variables allow us to create an environment file, and it's a more secure way to pass in potentially secure values that you want to be secure. And also, depending on the environment, you might want different values. So for instance, on a preview site, we might want different values than on a production site. So I'm going to create a new file, and this is just for development. So this will only pull in these values when I run Gatsby develop. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in, and I'll have to paste these.
Shane, you have environment variable keys memorized?
I'm just kind of remembering them from here.
That's amazing. You've dealt with Drupal a lot.
Well, I've also I did practice this demo, so because I
Okay.
didn't want to, you know how live demos go, right?
Yes. Oh my
So
gosh.
I wanted to make sure that it wouldn't fail. Of course, there's no guarantee. So the Drupal URL, that is going to be this URL of this site here. So I'm just going to grab that. The Drupal endpoint is going to be whatever the JSON API endpoint is. By default, that's just /JSON API. If you use the JSON API extras module, you can configure that to be something different. I'll just show you that if I go to /JSON API, it works. So you can see this is the JSON API, so I'm going to use that. And then I have a basic auth username and password. And so this is, very secure, and I will change this after this webinar, but I have a user called preview API user in Drupal. Oops. And I have a really secure password here that I'm going to save. And now the cool thing about this is it should be all set up. If I run, I'm going to make this bigger too while we're here. All right, hopefully that's better. If I run Gatsby develop, this is going to go out to Drupal, pull in that content, and then it's going to pull it into that site. So it's starting to fetch all data from Drupal. And the first time, it's going to have to get everything. The second time, since I have that fast builds option turned on inside the Gatsby, the plugin settings, it'll actually save a lot of that, so it doesn't have to pull all the data. It'll only pull what has changed since the last time I pulled data. Because what this actually is doing is it's going out to Drupal, and it's kind of like pulling any data that Gatsby cares about into Gatsby, and so that has that data locally. And you see now I have this Gatsby site, which I can pull over here, and you can see it. This is using Chakra UI, but it's pretty simple, page. And I can go and I can view individual detail pages of these pages. So pretty simple site, pretty basic, but it is, as you can see, pulling data straight from Drupal. So that's great. Let's take a
Jamie,
quick look at how
questions. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Do we have time for a few questions?
Yes.
There are several, so I figured a good time to tackle some of them. From Miranda, do you typically store your site menus on the Drupal side or on the Gatsby side?
That's a good question. I think it depends. If you have a smaller site and the menus aren't going to change very often, it's a lot easier just to do it in Gatsby, because that way, it is, you can kind of like skip having to like hook that up. You can do it from the Drupal side though. And if you want to allow your content editors to change the menu items, then that's the way you have to do it. And that's a requirement of a lot of sites, right? Where you want to allow certain content editors to change what shows up in the menu. So if that's the case, then you can do that within Drupal. There are some things you have to do. It's a little bit tricky to use Drupal's menus, and it does get also tricky because Drupal kind of lets you make an unlimited amount of hierarchy. You could have like menus within menus within menus, where you might not want to design your Gatsby site to handle that. So you might have to put some constraints on your content editors, like, oh, we only support just top level menu items, or it only supports a second level and not third or fourth level. Like sometimes you will, you give content editors a UI to do something, they might try to do it. And so you just have to be careful about that when you map it, that you're very clear with how it's supposed to work. But yeah, that's a good question.
Awesome. We have one more. I'll sort of summarize it a little bit differently in the way it's worded. What's the best way to handle images with Drupal and Gatsby and make sure you get all of the required SEO metadata?
Yes, great question. So there's Gatsby plugin image. This is what you should be using. And this creates all the different, basically what happens is it pulls down the image from Drupal, through Drupal's JSON API, it downloads the image, and it creates all the different possible sizes for that image. And it picks the size based on your screen resolution and all of that. And it gives you the right formats too, based on the browser. So you can even use formats like AVIF, which is a really newer format that is much faster. Now, one of the things that you run into is you have kind of this build time cost that you have to go through when you do that. So if you have a really large site, then what I would recommend is you could wait about a week and use Gatsby's image CDN with Drupal, because we recently launched Gatsby's image CDN in beta, so on Gatsby Cloud. And the great thing about this is it really speeds up your local development time, because it never has to download those images unless your local development site goes to the page. So for instance, it would never download this image until I actually loaded this page, and then all these images would be downloaded and processed locally. So the great thing about that is it drastically speeds up your local development time, and it provides a high performance way to display your images on your site and ensure that they're done in the best way, the best format possible. So either of those options work. Again, downloading and running it locally works really great, but as you scale up, if you have tens of thousands of pages, it starts to make local development a little slower. And so you might want to look at something like image CDN. And like I said, we have it, we were working on it, we're testing it locally. We have some customers that are starting to help us test it out, and we will be releasing it pretty soon. Any other questions?
Yes, JD asked a question quite a bit ago, and again, I'll kind of summarize it. He's trying to do something that's location-based on a per-user basis. Would SSR be the correct technique for that? How would you do some sort of dynamic per-user or even per-user location type of thing?
Yep. Well, like I said before, SSR is your escape hatch. So when you want to do like personalization, when you want to location-based display certain things to different users, you're going to want to SSR. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. It really depends on how you're getting that location data. Are you hitting an API to determine what to display? But yeah, SSR is the answer. And then the actual implementation will vary based on what the exact needs are, but you should be able to do it with SSR.
Awesome. And then someone asked about preview. How does preview work with Gatsby and Drupal? And can I recreate a preview experience like I'm used to in Drupal with Gatsby?
Yeah, why don't we do that right now?
We're doing it live.
So I'm in Gatsby Cloud. I clicked around pretty quickly. So I'm going to add a brand new site in Gatsby Cloud, and I'm just going to use the original starter because I didn't change anything.
The starter that you were showing us a second ago locally?
Yep, this starter here, yeah. So it's the same, it'll be the same thing. But what I would typically do is once I was, had it working locally, I would commit it up to GitHub or, GitLab or whatever, and then I would use that. But I can just use the exact starter here because we didn't actually make any changes. And I'll keep everything the default there. And one thing I do have to do is set these environment variables. So the great thing about that is if I go here, I should be able to just copy and paste these because I already had this running locally. And I have one for builds and one for previews. So Gatsby Cloud gives you a build server, which is like your production content, and then a preview server, which is your kind of your staging area, right? And one of the benefits of a Gatsby preview, and we'll show this in a second, is you actually get a fully working preview site. And so I do want my builds just to be using this other user account rather than the preview user, and I'll show you why in a second. So if I go into my list, I have two users here. I have API user and I have preview API user, and they have different roles. This user has the ability to access unpublished content. The great thing about that is then my preview site can pull in any of my draft content. And we want that because we want to actually be able to preview what the draft's going to look like when I actually publish it. So I'm going to use just this API user here. And then I'm going to save. Oops, I'm going to add it and use the preview user for this one. I'll click save. And then I'll build the site. And this is going to take, as I mentioned before, the first build's going to be a little slower. It'll take a minute or two. And then what you will see, though, is because of the way that previews work and because of the power of incremental builds, if I'm just making data changes, which are probably 80 to 90% of the builds you will need on your site, they're very fast, less than 10 seconds, which means that to a user that's a content editor that's previewing content, a content editor that's publishing content, it's going to be pretty much as fast as what they're used to. So if you think about it, if you have a really large scale Drupal site with multiple levels of caching, when you click publish, you're really not ever sure when a user is going to see that content anyways, because you don't know how, you may have to clear the cache to make sure that they see it. And that sometimes takes 10 to 20 seconds on a big Drupal site. But it just kind of like this unknown. With Gatsby, you do have that build time, but it tells you when it's ready. And so you're going to know right away. While this is going, let's go ahead and kind of pre-prepare a new piece of content that I'll start creating. And then we'll hopefully not break anything. And I'll give it a URL alias. And I'll find an image. Let's grab just a Gatsby logo. And I'm not going to I'm going to leave it unpublished so we can see that it is going to just work on my preview site. So if I go to CMS preview, it still says it's building. We'll give this a second. And if we want
to have a couple questions.
Yeah, let's answer a question while we're letting this build.
While this is running. Do incremental builds on the Gatsby Cloud production site work with paragraph revisions in Drupal's content moderation?
Great question. So I'm going to probably need some more information, but if you're just using, so essentially, you can use content moderation within Drupal, and you can have, paragraph revisions tied to certain revisions of content. So the answer is, I believe it does work. I haven't tested that scenario specifically, but I know that we have a lot of large scale sites with multiple content editors using paragraphs for components, and they're using content moderation and revisions. And I've seen PRs to Gatsby Source Drupal to handle those things. So the answer is yes, with an asterisk that I haven't seen it myself, but I'm pretty sure that the people that the customers I've talked to are using those same things and would need that. And there are some, some things that, depending on your content editing needs, you can make it work for your users. So it's pretty flexible, but everyone's needs, especially when they're using Drupal, like they have teams of content editors, it can be a little different. So you kind of have to see what the team needs, the content editing team, and then see what Gatsby provides, and then you kind of work it together and you kind of massage it into place. But it should be able to work. Any other questions, Jeff?
That person clarified that sometimes they see inconsistent performance. Sometimes a paragraph triggers an update, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to volunteer Shane. Email Shane@gatsbyjs.com with more details about your use case, and we would love to look into it. I'm saying we because Shane will forward me the email as well.
Yes, definitely let me know, because as we get to these more complex use cases, if there are rough edges on any of this stuff, these are things that we care a lot about, and we want to make sure that we're understanding where it's falling short if it is, and let's get it fixed.
There's another question here that's not specific to Drupal, but is related to Gatsby Cloud. Is there a way to hide production builds behind a password similar to pull request builds or other types of builds on Gatsby Cloud? I can try and answer this one. Yes. Yeah. So when you go to site settings and you configure access control, that should be for all builds. Shane, did I get that right?
You're saying if you go into site settings?
I believe access control works for all builds.
Anyone can see your site's preview and build. Password required.
Password protected.
Build. Login required. Yep, so it looks like it does cover preview and build. Now, if you hooked it up to hosting, then then it wouldn't, of course, like the hosted site. So you could create your own, deploy your own custom domain or whatever, and then that wouldn't be password protected. Okay, so that you can see this build was successful. So if I wanted to go to the site, this is the production version of the site. You can see it works exactly as it did locally. That's great. And if we go to the preview version, I don't know why the preview site hasn't run yet. Let's see if it's stuck here. Looks like it says it's done, but it's uploading right now. Let's just see if we can clear cache and restart it. But while that's going, let's go ahead and go to our build and let's just create a new page. Let's save this page and we'll go ahead and publish it. So it should kick off this new build. So if we click save here, now you come back over to Gatsby Cloud, it's not going to work. And the reason is because I didn't configure the Gatsby Drupal module. So I got ahead of myself. If we go, so as I said before, you only need the JSON API module to get this to work. However, if you want this kind of live content editing experience, there is a Gatsby Drupal module that you can install. And I have some of these from the previous test. I'm going to just overwrite them. So I go back into site details. I go into the webhook section, and I'm going to go ahead and copy the preview webhook, paste that in, copy the builds webhook, paste that in, and then copy the content sync, which I'm not going to show today, but it's just like a better way to hand off from the CMS to the preview page. It kind of provides you like a loading screen. And then for the server URL, I'm just going to take this URL right from here because that's the URL of the Gatsby site. Now, if I save it and I go back into this content and resave this page, you'll see that if I go back to Gatsby Cloud, go to builds, you're going to see it should have triggered a data update, which it did. And this data update, it built in 3 seconds and deployed in less than a second. So it took 4 seconds from when I clicked publish to when I clicked, from when I clicked publish for it to become available. So if I visit the site, you can see there's the live webinar test, and it's in line just the same as all the other ones. So maybe didn't pick the best image to use. I could have picked a better actual wider image that didn't get scaled up, but it's all working. And that all happened in just a few seconds. And now let's do just a quick test on preview. You can see this preview was just 2 seconds. Just to be sure that this all works, let's do one more piece of content, and then I guess, Jack, do you have any questions while I do this? I'm going to spin up just one more test, but if we have any questions, now would be a time because we are getting close to the end of the hour.
We are. Just some conversation about multi-site. Folks are excited to see that. No specific questions. I guess to clarify something earlier, it does look like password protecting branch builds like production is not supported today on Gatsby Cloud, but it is supported for pull requests. So good clarification there. So, but if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A tab, and we'll try and answer those in the next couple minutes. And as a reminder, this recording will be sent to everyone that registered for the event.
And in this case,
Shane, you got 60 seconds.
Yep, I created this without publishing. And then if I go back to Gatsby Cloud and I go to preview, wow, that was fast. I think that was fast. Is that right? That seemed really, I think it's already there, but we'll refresh. Okay, so yeah, it was already there. So if I go to preview site, I should see a preview test. It shows up. But if I do go to the production site, because it's using that different user, it didn't trigger a production build. If I look under builds, you'll see that there was no build at 10:58. There's only been 2 builds the whole time. So I could keep editing this unpublished content, make changes, and the preview site would keep getting these changes in a few seconds. So I click update or whatever, and then it'd be ready. We didn't get to look at a lot of the React components today, but if you are interested in looking at, okay, how does that actually work with pulling data in, and what does that look like on the component level? What does that JavaScript look like? I would highly recommend looking at that workshop that I mentioned before, because that workshop is going to have all of the information in a much more detailed form, and it's a little bit longer form, so you can follow along and learn how to map paragraphs to React components, for example, and how the whole data layer works within Gatsby. Any other last minute questions? I know we're about at time.
We are at time. I don't see any more burning questions. Like I said, if you have Drupal questions, you can email them to shane@gatsbyjs.com, and we'll try and share those. Oh, one question, Shane, the workshop you mentioned, where can people find that?
So so in the slides, which you'll get sent through an email, there is a YouTube video this is on slide 40 of decoupling Drupal workshop. If I might just go to it here, you can probably find it on YouTube, just decoupling Drupal using Gatsby, a crash course by Jesus. It's 2 hours long. This was just last month that this was recorded at GatsbyConf. So I would highly recommend looking at that, because that is going to get into kind of the details that we didn't have time to get into today.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I'm glad that this was engaging and we were able to ask questions. Someone said DrupalCon. Shane, you're going to DrupalCon, right? I
will be there. Kyle will be there. Tyler from our team will be there. We'll have a pretty good crowd. So if you are going to DrupalCon, stop by the Gatsby booth and say hi. We can chat, and it'll be fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you in your email. Catch you later.
See you, everybody.
Cheers.